In this video, we're going to be explaining Ichigo's Fullbring powers and his abilities. I want to talk about the various different forms of Fullbring that Ichigo manifests. This is because after Ichigo regains his Shinigami powers and they merge with his Fullbring powers, it results in one of my favorite forms that Ichigo takes in the entirety of the series, Ichigo's Fullbring Shikai form. This shouldn't be a surprise, especially if you've seen the profile picture for my channel. The design for it is based off of Ichigo's Shikai Fullbring form. So in this video, I aim to explain what Fullbring actually is, as well as diving into all of the different ways that Ichigo manifests his Fullbring abilities until he is able to perfect them. And lastly, we will talk about what happens after Ichigo regains his Shinigami powers and they merge with his newly acquired Fullbring abilities. So let's get into the topic of the video. This is my explanation of Ichigo's Fullbring form and abilities. Before the video begins, only 79% of the people who watch the content on my channel are subscribed. So if you enjoy these videos and want to continue seeing more, then definitely help to support me and my channel by subscribing and turning on the bell notifications. Thank you for your support, and now let's dive into the topic of this video. 17 months after the defeat of Aizen, Ichigo begins to have difficulty dealing with his powerlessness, and this is explored during the Fullbring Arc, which introduces us to the concept of Fullbringers, and a method for Ichigo to regain his abilities in the form of Fullbring. Humans who are spiritually aware are referred to as Fullbringers, and it is this group of individuals who possess the abilities of Fullbring. These abilities allow them to manipulate the spiritual energy that resides within physical matter. Their powers are made up of the residue that is left behind from the spiritual pressure of hollows. The powers that manifest through Fullbring resemble more of a hollow's abilities than that of a Shinigami's. The reason for this is explained in chapter 433, where we learn that Fullbring abilities can develop in an individual whose parents had survived a hollow attack prior to them being born, and as a result of being attacked by a hollow, the traces of that hollow's spiritual pressure remained within the mother's womb, and this residual energy is passed on to the offspring when they are born. Through the Everything But the Rain flashback arc, which occurs during the Thousand-Year Blood War arc, we learned that Ichigo's mother Masaki did indeed survive a hollow attack from the Hollow White, which of course was an experimental hollow created by Aizen, and when Ichigo was born he had inherited the Hollow White, which eventually had fused with his inherited Shinigami powers from his father, thus resulting in Hollow Ichigo, which is Ichigo's true Zanpakuto spirit. But during the Fate Karakura Town arc, we are aware that Ichigo had lost his Shinigami powers after using the final Getsuga Tensho. After reading the entirety of the story, we are aware that just by losing his Shinigami powers doesn't mean that he had lost his hollow powers. Up until the end of the Fate Karakura Town arc, whenever Ichigo had wanted to utilize his hollow abilities, he had done so through the use of a hollow mask. But what the Fullbring arc serves to explain is how Ichigo merges his hollow powers with his Shinigami powers, so he will no longer need to manifest a hollow mask in order to utilize that aspect of his abilities. In order to do this, Ichigo needed to manifest his hollow abilities in an alternative way, and it was thanks to Ginjo Kugo and his group called Execution that Ichigo was able to learn how to manifest his hollow abilities through Fullbring. The key thing that we have to learn about Fullbring powers is that all ordinary objects within the world of Bleach possess a soul. A Fullbringer utilizes their abilities to manipulate the soul that resides within objects. They can alter its physical appearance as well as manipulate its movements. In chapter 432, Ginjo demonstrates this by manipulating the liquid in a cup to float through the air and into his mouth. He describes Fullbring powers as the ability to draw out the soul that resides in materials and to put them to their use. A Fullbringer can draw out the soul of the asphalt in the ground so that it repels them into the air, enabling them to jump higher. They also have the ability to stand on water by manipulating its form. All of these examples of Fullbring powers being utilized culminate into Ginjo Kugo's final example, as he explains when a Fullbringer comes into contact with a tool or a piece of equipment that is very compatible with them, and it is something that they have learned to master, then they can change its very form. He demonstrates this through the necklace that he is wearing, as he transforms this simple necklace of a cross into a large sword. He explains that this is what is known as Fullbring, and through this example you can understand where the name Fullbring comes from, as it means to bring out the full potential of a tool or a piece of equipment. Ichigo's Fullbring powers are activated through the affinity that he has for his substitute Shinigami badge. His Fullbring powers were awakened after he had remembered the strong emotions that he has associated with the object. the feeling of pride that he had felt when he had used his substitute Shinigami badge to transform into his Shinigami form. This feeling of pride that he had felt had resulted in him developing an affinity for this object. In chapter 436, we learn how Chad was able to manifest his Fullbring, as it is revealed that the source of his powers are the skin on both of his arms. He explains that because he had dark skin, he had faced some difficulty and some discrimination, but because of his heritage, he had never lost pride in his skin. He was always proud of who he was, and this was thanks to his grandfather. Chad had utilized his abilities for the first time when he had recalled his grandfather telling him to be proud of himself. So he asks Ichigo to think back to a time that he was proud of utilizing his Shinigami powers through that substitute Shinigami badge. Ichigo then thinks to himself that he cannot remember a time where he wasn't proud of having his Shinigami powers. Thanks to Ichigo's feelings of pride as a Shinigami, it results in his substitute Shinigami badge releasing Black Reiatsu. This Reiatsu takes the form of his Bankai Zanpakuto. Unlike the hilt of a blade, his powers in this form are primarily used for defense. He can also utilize his powers to absorb the impact of a much larger attack, which is demonstrated in chapter 437. Of course, this is the first introductory form of Ichigo's Fullbring, and I like to call this the badge form. At the end of chapter 444, Ichigo reveals the second form of his Fullbring, as we see that along with his change of appearance, his powers have also evolved. His entire body is covered in a black Reiatsu, and his right arm has taken the shape of a black blade. In chapter 445, it is revealed that Ichigo has a clad type Fullbring. Chad understands that this is similar to Ichigo's Shinigami Shihakusho. When he had transformed into his Bankai, it wasn't just his Zanpakuto that had changed. His Shinigami Shihakusho had also changed, and it had become an integral part of his Bankai. As if you recall during the Fate Karakura Town arc, Ichigo had explained to Unohana that in his Bankai form, the condition of his clothing represents how much spiritual pressure that he has. The true form of his power is when Ichigo is wearing his powers. In chapter 452, after his training is completed, Ichigo unveils the final completed form of his Fullbring. During his final training with Ginjo, when Ichigo was blinded, he was able to see the outline of Ginjo's figure, and this was because he was seeing his spiritual pressure. Ginjo explains that there was a reason behind why he had slashed his eyes and had made him blind. He had intended for Ichigo to realize that the glowing silhouette of Ginjo was him sensing his spiritual pressure, and this was to demonstrate to Ichigo that he is slowly regaining his Shinigami powers. After Ichigo had used the final Getsuga Tensho, his spiritual pressure had vanished, and the remnants of his spiritual pressure had taken its time to slowly gather and build up and lay dormant within him. Ginjo explains that they had helped Ichigo to awaken that spiritual pressure inside of him through the use of the energy that had flowed into his body from his substitute Shinigami badge. He continues to explain that once Ichigo has enough strength to use Fullbring, and after his Shinigami powers return, they will eventually fuse with this Fullbring. He will end up transforming into a form that has more power than a Shinigami. This is of course foreshadowing for when Ichigo regains his Shinigami powers, and they eventually fuse with his Fullbring powers. In chapter 452, Ginjo perfectly explains to us the significance of Ichigo regaining his Shinigami powers now that he has learnt Fullbring. It also explains why Ichigo is so powerful in its Shikai Fullbring form. But before we talk about that, let's cover Ichigo's completed Fullbring form. In this new form, Ichigo has an entirely new outfit. He appears to have a black bodysuit with white armor covering most of his body, and in this form, he is able to transform his substitute Shinigami badge into a machete-like blade. As we know, Ichigo is eventually betrayed by Ginjo and has his newly acquired Fullbring ability stolen from him. When he demands for his powers to be returned to him, he is stabbed from behind by Rukia, who is holding a Reishi blade. The fact that he can see Rukia means that he has regained his Shinigami powers, as we learn that the blade that he was stabbed with contained the Reishi of several different Shinigami. After regaining his Shinigami powers, Ichigo's appearance changes significantly. You can see that his Fullbring powers have merged with his Shinigami powers, as he has Fullbring markings all over his body, in particular the black X markings on his wrist and his chest. In addition to this, Ichigo's Zanpakuto also takes up a brand new form, and this is of course credited to the traces of Ichigo's Fullbring that were left behind after Ginjo had stolen his powers. The entire blade is reshaped. The base of his Zanpakuto now has a silver hilt with grey wrappings running all the way down it. In chapter 457, Ginjo explained a scenario where a former Shinigami who obtains Fullbring eventually has the remnants of their Shinigami power merge with their completed Fullbring. But what happens to Ichigo at the end of the Fullbring arc is the complete opposite. He ends up becoming a former Fullbringer with remnants of Fullbring power, who merges with a a full Shinigami, as Ichigo regains all of his Shinigami powers thanks to the Reishi blade, and these Shinigami powers end up fusing with the remnants of Ichigo's Fullbring powers, and this results in Ichigo now having a completely altered appearance. And this is explained to us in issue number 8 of Weekly Shonen Jump, which was released in 2012. A lot of people criticize the Fullbring arc, but in my opinion it's one of my favourite arcs told within Bleach, and I'm fairly confident in saying that most people who dislike this arc don't really understand the significance of it in terms of developing Ichigo as a character, explaining not only how he regains his powers, but how he does so in a more enhanced manner. I for one remember that a lot of people who are reading Bleach didn't understand the significance of the changes that appeared on Ichigo's clothing or on his zanpakuto through the various different forms that he takes up within the story, but after analysing and breaking down the story, we can see that each change that Kubo does in Ichigo's character design is very significant and it has a meaning behind it. When you understand how Kubo had several pieces in play that he put together right towards the end, and it resulted in Ichigo's Fullbring Shinigami form, it's exactly the reason why I love the Fullbring arc. A lot of people pay attention to how Ginjo Kugo was an obvious villain, while completely overlooking how Ichigo went from having no power to having more power than ever before right at the end of this arc. So what did all of you think about my explanation of Ichigo's Fullbring powers? Do you now understand what Fullbring is, and why Ichigo's outfit had changed at the end of the Fullbring arc? Let me know if there were any points about Fullbringers or Ichigo's Fullbring powers that I have forgotten to mention in this video, and I want to know all of your thoughts about Ichigo's Fullbring powers and the Fullbring arc in general. Has this video helped you to appreciate the Fullbring arc a bit more, or do you still dislike it? I would love to know all of your thoughts, and I can't wait to read them in the comment section. If there are any other topics that you want me to explain from Bleach or any other anime, then do leave some suggestions for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach video. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, then please consider supporting my channel on Patreon. I have multiple tiers with rewards including access to an exclusive Discord server, video scripts, as well as being the first to know about unreleased upcoming videos. Thank you for your time, and whatever you choose to contribute I will appreciate, and it will mean a lot to me.